My ex-wife's new husband and her took my place at my daughter's 15th birthday party. Her real father prefers watching from afar, he said. After 15 years raising her alone, I stood in the back. When the music began, she stopped, pointed at him, and said something that made him step back. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what city you're watching us from. There was a man standing in the middle of the dance floor. But that man wasn't me. He wore an elegant suit, a satisfied smile, and open arms waiting for my daughter. My daughter, the one I raised alone for 15 years. And I was at the back of the room standing, still, with a broken heart. Victoria, my ex, had told me that morning with a coldness that still hurts to remember. Mauricio is going to do the waltz with Gabriella. You can stay at the back. The biological father enjoys it more watching from afar. And she smiled. She smiled as if she had just won something. I didn't say anything. I swallowed and went to the back. But what Victoria didn't know, what Mauricio didn't know, what absolutely no one in that room knew, is that Gabriella had something planned, something that was going to stop the music, stop the party, stop time, something that would make Mauricio take 2 steps back in the middle of the dance floor, that would make Victoria drop her glass, that would make everyone who was there that night look at me, only at me. But to understand what happened in that waltz, first you have to understand everything that happened before. You have to understand who I am, who Gabriella is, and why that day was the most important of the last 15 years of my life. My name is Javier. I'm 49 years old, and I'm the kind of father no one talks about in movies. Not the one who appears in beautiful moments. Not the one who arrives with gifts when everything is fine. I'm the one who is always there without applause, without recognition, without anyone saying thank you. When Gabriella was barely 3 months old, Victoria told me she didn't love me anymore. Just like that, without drama, without crying, without a long explanation. A Tuesday night, while I was heating milk for the bottle, she told me, "Javier, this is over." I was 34 years old, with a baby in my arms and a life that was falling apart in real time. The first months were the hardest of my existence. Victoria went to live with her mother, and custody became complicated, very complicated. She wanted Gabriella to live with her. I wanted to be present. The lawyers started talking, the judges started deciding, and in the end, after months of fighting, of papers, of hearings that left me sleepless, custody was shared. But reality was different. Victoria worked, traveled, had her life, and Gabriella, most of the time, was with me. I took her to the doctor, I took her to school. I stayed awake when she had a fever. I learned to do braids because she wanted to go to kindergarten with pretty hair, and I didn't know how, but I learned. Do you know how long it took me to learn to do a well-made braid? 3 weeks. YouTube tutorials, clumsy fingers. Gabriella, laughing at me, but I did it. That's me, the one who doesn't know but learns. The one who can't but tries. The one who doesn't have but gives everything he has. During the first 5 years, Victoria barely appeared. Not because she was a bad person, at least that's what I told myself, so I wouldn't go crazy with rage, but because she simply had other priorities. Outings, friends, a new boyfriend every season. And I was there with Gabriella building a routine, a life, a connection that no one would be able to take from us. I remember one day, Gabriella was about 4 years old. She looked at me while we were having breakfast and told me, "Daddy, you're never going to leave." I dropped my spoon, kept looking at her, and told her, "Never, my love, never." And I kept my word. Every day of those 15 years, I kept my word. I paid for her school, a private school that cost me 480 pesos a month, and that I paid even if I had to cut my own expenses. No outings, no vacations for me, everything for her. When Gabriella was 7 years old, she got seriously ill, an infection the doctors didn't detect in time. She was hospitalized for 5 days. I slept in the hospital those 5 nights in a chair with a broken back and my heart in my throat. Victoria appeared on the 3rd day. She stayed 2 hours and left. I stayed. That was what defined everything. Not words, not promises, facts, days, nights, presence when it hurts the most to be present. Gabriella grew up seeing that, absorbing that. Even though she was little, even though she didn't say it, I know she saw it. Children see everything, everything. When she turned 10, Victoria reappeared stronger. She had a new, more stable life, a better job. And Mauricio, just mentioning his name, I feel something I don't really know how to describe. It isn't hate, it's something deeper. It's the feeling of seeing someone who arrives when everything is already built and acts as if he had raised it. He arrived in Gabriella's life with expensive gifts, weekend trips, perfect smiles. And Gabriella, who was a child after all, enjoyed those things. It was normal, it was human, but I saw something she couldn't see yet. Mauricio didn't look at her the way you look at a daughter. He looked at her the way you look at an accessory, like something included in Victoria's package. And Victoria had changed. The woman I knew, the absent mother who at least sometimes showed guilt, had disappeared. Now she was confident, determined, and cruel in a very specific way. Cruel with words that sound normal, but hurt differently. It was around when Gabriella was 12 that Victoria started changing the rules. Small things at first, changing schedules without telling me, enrolling Gabriella in activities without consulting me, making school decisions alone. I complained. She ignored, and Mauricio smiled from behind, always smiling. I kept paying for everything. School, health insurance, clothes, school supplies, everything. But I had less and less say in the decisions. It was like paying for building a house and having others decide how to paint it. And the worst wasn't that. The worst was I could see something changing in Gabriella, not towards me. No, our connection was still the same, but she was learning to move in two very different worlds, mine and her mother's. And I wondered at night when the house was silent if someday those two worlds would collide. I didn't imagine the crash would be in the middle of a dance floor in front of 200 people with music that would stop suddenly. But I didn't know that yet. There were still 5 years left until that night. And in those 5 years, things are going to get much worse before getting better. Much worse. When Gabriella turned 12, I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. The following years were a silent war. The kind of war that doesn't appear on any paper, that no judge can see, that no lawyer can argue. A war of accumulated small humiliations, of decisions made without me, of closed doors with a smile. And Mauricio was very good at that, very good. He wasn't the kind of man who shouts. He wasn't the kind who threatens openly. It was worse than that. He was the kind who smiles in your face while pulling the floor from under your feet, so slowly that when you realize that you're already falling. I remember the first time I saw him act like that clearly. Gabriella was 12, and there was a festival at her school. She was going to sing. She had practiced for weeks. She called me excited to tell me. I set that day aside a month in advance. I didn't schedule anything. I didn't accept any commitment. That day was Gabriella's and no one else's. I arrived at the auditorium 20 minutes early. I found a seat in the second row, near the center, so Gabriella could see me well from the stage. 10 minutes later, Victoria and Mauricio arrived. Mauricio looked at the seat I had saved next to me for Victoria. That seat I saved out of habit, out of inertia, because I still hadn't learned to let go of certain things. And without saying a single word, he sat there, put his jacket on it, settled in, and signaled for Victoria to sit on the other side of him. Victoria sat without looking at me. I was left with the empty seat next to me. Gabriella came out on stage, looked for me with her eyes in the audience, found me, smiled, and I returned the biggest smile I could because I wasn't going to let that moment be stained. But inside something broke that afternoon, not because of the seat, not because of the stupidity of the seat, but because I understood this wasn't going to stop, that Mauricio wasn't going to get tired, that Victoria wasn't going to stop him, and that I was going to have to learn to absorb blows I never deserved. The following months confirmed everything. Mauricio started appearing at school meetings as if he were the father. He signed forms when Victoria couldn't go. Teachers started knowing him, greeting him, calling him when there was something to communicate. I kept paying the tuition. I was still the one appearing on official documents, but in daily practice, in the hallways, in meetings, in casual conversations, Mauricio was taking my place and doing it so naturally, so confidently, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. One night, Gabriella called me and told me that at school they had asked her how many siblings she had, and she had answered by talking about Mauricio's family, his nephews, his cousins. I listened quietly. When I hung up, I sat in the dark in my room for a long time. I wasn't angry with Gabriella. I could never be. She was navigating two worlds and doing what she could, but I was angry, deeply angry with the situation. With the silent injustice of it all, I called my sister Daniela that night. Daniela is the person who knows me best in this world, 3 years younger than me, but with a mind that has always worked better than mine in difficult moments. She had seen everything from the beginning, every stage, every blow, every night I didn't sleep. I told her about the school, about Mauricio in the meetings, about the seat at the festival. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she told me something I didn't fully understand at that moment, but that later, much later, would make enormous sense. She told me, "Javier, don't do anything yet. Just watch and save everything." Save everything. I asked her what she meant. Messages, dates, situations, everything you can document. I don't know when, but a time will come when you'll need all that. Back then, I thought she was exaggerating, that it was her protective instinct speaking, that there was nothing to document because there was no plan in motion. But Daniela was right as almost always. The year Gabriella turned 13 was the year Victoria called me to talk about the 15th birthday. There were still 2 years left, but Victoria was always like that. An organizer, a planner. She needed to have everything under control well in advance. She told me she wanted to throw a big party, an elegant hall, 200 people, a special dress, the traditional waltz, everything. I didn't have any problem with that. On the contrary, Gabriella deserved that celebration. She deserved all the best. I told her to count on me for whatever she needed, financially, logistically, in everything. Victoria said, "Good, I'll let you know." And she hung up. What she didn't tell me in that call, what she kept to herself for 2 full years, was that she already had a plan. She had already decided how she was going to do that party, who was going to be where, and who was going to dance that waltz. But I didn't know that, so I went on. I kept working, I kept paying, I kept being the same father as always. That year I had to make a difficult decision. The school where Gabriella studied raised its tuition to $620 a month, a significant increase. I was in a complicated moment with work, a contract wasn't renewed, 3 tight months, but I didn't hesitate for a second. I sold my TV, reduced my expenses to the minimum, and kept paying. Gabriella didn't find out. She didn't have to find out. That's what a father does. He doesn't charge you for sacrifices. He doesn't tell you about them. He just makes them. But Daniela knew. Daniela always knew and saved everything. When Gabriella turned 14, the dynamic in Victoria's house had changed noticeably. Mauricio practically lived there already. Well, he didn't practically live there. They had gotten married in a small ceremony to which I obviously wasn't invited. I found out from Gabriella. She told me one afternoon while we were doing homework together at my house. She mentioned it casually, as if it were a minor detail, as if her mother getting married wasn't something that required more explanation. I nodded, asked her if she was happy. She said yes, and I told her I was glad, and it was true. In the part of me that always puts Gabriella first, it was true. But in another part, in that part you don't show, but that exists, I felt the board had changed again, that Mauricio now had an official title, that he was no longer Mom's boyfriend. Now he was the husband, the legal stepfather. And that title, in the hands of someone like him, was a tool. The following months proved it. He started making decisions about Gabriella with an authority he didn't have before, or at least didn't exercise so openly. He spoke with Gabriella's doctor without informing me. He changed an extracurricular activity Gabriella had been doing for 2 years, a dance class she loved because according to him it no longer made sense with the 15th birthday prep. Gabriella called me crying that afternoon. I held back my rage. I told her everything was going to be fine, that the 15th birthday was going to be beautiful, that I understood. I hung up and texted Victoria. The answer arrived 40 minutes later. 6 words. Mauricio is right. It's already decided. 6 words. 14 years of being the present father. The father who never failed. The father who paid for everything and was in everything. And 6 words. That night, I called Daniela. She didn't let me finish. She said, "Did you save the screenshot of the message?" I saved it. There was a year left until Gabriella's 15th birthday, and I still didn't know that Victoria and Mauricio were planning something that would leave me speechless, something that was going to be the biggest blow of the last 15 years. But I also didn't know what Daniela was already building in silence, and much less what Gabriella, my little girl, my daughter, had been keeping in her heart for much longer than I imagined. There were 8 months left until Gabriella's 15th birthday, when Victoria called me for what she described as a meeting to organize the party details. I arrived on time. I always arrive on time. It was a Saturday morning. They called me to Victoria's house, the same house where Mauricio now lived, the same house where my daughter slept half the weeks. I arrived with a notebook, with ideas, with a desire to contribute. I arrived as the father I'm. Mauricio opened the door. Not Victoria. Mauricio looked me up and down with that smile of his that never reaches his eyes and told me, "Javier, come in. We were already waiting for you. We were already waiting for you." As if it were his house, as if I were a guest, as if at some point in the last 15 years the protagonist of this story had changed. I sat in the living room. Victoria was on the couch with a notebook full of notes. Mauricio sat next to her. I sat across from them, and at that moment, without anyone saying it, I understood the geometry of what was happening. The two of them together, me alone in front. It wasn't an organizing meeting, it was a presentation. They had already decided everything. They just called me to inform me. Victoria started talking. The hall was already booked, a place that cost $3,800 a night, with a capacity for 200 people. The menu was already chosen. The cake already had a design. The orchestra was already hired. Everything decided, everything paid. Well, not everything paid. That part came later. She talked about the dress, a champagne-colored lace one with embroidery on the bodice, designed by a local dressmaker who charged hundreds of dollars. She talked about the decoration, the flowers, the souvenirs for the guests. I listened and nodded. It was my daughter's party. Even if they hadn't consulted me on anything, it was Gabriella's party, and I was going to support it. Then came the moment Victoria had been saving for the end. She closed her notebook. She looked at me and said, with that calculated calmness she handles so well regarding the waltz, "We have decided that Mauricio is going to dance with Gabriella." The room went silent. I didn't say anything immediately. I needed a second, just a second, to process what I had just heard. "Excuse me," was the only thing that came out of my mouth. Victoria didn't repeat it. It wasn't necessary. She had said it clearly enough. What she did was add, "It's the most natural thing. Mauricio lives with her. He's present in her day-to-day. It makes sense that it's him." Mauricio didn't say anything. He just had that smile. I breathed deeply, very deeply. I told them the father-daughter waltz was a specific tradition, that that moment existed precisely to honor the father, that I had been present every day of the last 15 years, that I had paid for her school, her clothes, her doctor, her whole life, that that waltz was mine. Victoria let me finish and then said something that's been engraved somewhere inside my chest since that day. "Javier, no one is taking anything from you, but let's be honest, Gabriella has a stable father figure at home. Mauricio is the one who helps her with her homework, who takes her to her activities, who's there every day. You can come to the party. Of course you can. You can enjoy it from wherever you are. Sometimes the biological father enjoys it more watching from afar. The biological father enjoys it more watching from afar." She said it just like that, with such naturalness, as if it were a universal truth I should have known for a long time. I looked at Mauricio. He still had the smile. He added, as if he wanted to make the wound a little deeper, "Don't take it the wrong way, Javier. It's what's best for Gabriella. What's best for Gabriella." That argument, always that argument. The perfect shield behind which people who want to hurt you hide, without you being able to defend yourself. Because if you defend yourself, you look selfish. You look like the one who doesn't think about his daughter. You look like the bad guy in the story. I got up, picked up my notebook, the notebook full of ideas I was never going to show anyone. And before leaving, I said only one thing. "I'm going to talk to Gabriella." Victoria answered immediately. "We already talked to her. She agrees." I left that house without saying anything else. I walked to my car, sat inside, and stayed there with my hands on the steering wheel without starting the engine for 20 minutes. I didn't cry. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. There was something inside me that refused to take that step yet, a part that still didn't fully believe what had just happened. I called Daniela. I told her everything, every word, every detail, Victoria's tone, Mauricio's smile, that phrase about the biological father. Daniela listened in total silence. And when I finished, the first thing she asked me was, "Did you record the conversation?" I hadn't recorded it. Daniela sighed. Then she said, "It's fine from now on record everything you can, everything." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed thinking about Gabriella. If what Victoria had said was true, if my daughter had really accepted that, if at some point along the way I had lost something I hadn't realized I lost. The next day, Gabriella came to my house like every Sunday. She arrived with her backpack, with her usual energy, gave me a hug at the door, and asked if I had made coffee because she wanted to have breakfast with me. I sat across from her at the kitchen table. I looked at her. I looked in her face for any sign of what Victoria had told me, any discomfort, any distance. I found nothing. Gabriella was the same as always, my daughter, my little girl, the same one who looked at me with those eyes that told me everything without words since she was a baby. I didn't ask her anything about the waltz. That day, I made the decision not to pressure her, not to put her in the middle, not to turn her into the battlefield of something that was between adults. But I did ask her something. I asked her how she felt about everything regarding the party, if she was excited, if there was anything she wanted to be different. Gabriella smiled. She told me she was very excited, and then she told me something I kept in my heart, as if it were the most valuable thing anyone had told me in years. She told me, "Daddy, all I need is for you to be there. For you to be there." She didn't tell me anything about the waltz. She didn't tell me anything about Mauricio, just that for me to be there. And at that moment, I didn't know how to interpret it as a sign she knew something I didn't know yet, or if it was simply her way of telling me my presence was enough. Months later, I would understand exactly what she meant by those words. But that Sunday, we just had breakfast together. We talked about her school, a movie she wanted to see, a book she'd been assigned for homework, which she said was boring, but I told her to give it a chance. It was a normal Sunday of the good ones, the ones you treasure without knowing you're treasuring them. The following weeks were tense in a different way. Victoria kept sending me party updates, costs, decisions, always in text messages, never calls cold, punctual, informative messages, as if she were copying me on a corporate email, and I was just another event supplier. She asked for my financial contribution, dollars, to cover part of the hall and the orchestra. I sent them without a peep, without asking for explanations, without asking why I paid but didn't decide. I sent them because they were for Gabriella. Always everything was for Gabriella. Mauricio, I found out later through a conversation Daniela had with a mutual friend, hadn't put a single dollar into the party yet. Zero. But his name was in all the plans, his presence was in all the arrangements, and his place in the waltz was confirmed. I paid. He appeared. That was the pattern. That had always been the pattern. Daniela called me one afternoon during those weeks with a different voice. Not my worried sister's voice, but another voice, a calmer, firmer voice. She told me, "Javier, I need you to trust me. There are things happening I can't tell you about yet, but I need you not to do anything, not to confront Victoria, not to say anything to Mauricio. Can you do that?" I asked her what was happening. She said, "Not yet. Trust me." Daniela had never asked me that without having a reason. In 49 years of knowing her, my sister didn't say things without weight behind them. I said yes and waited. There were 4 months left until the party. And while I waited in silence, while I continued being the present father, the father who paid, the father who didn't make scenes, two things were happening at the same time without me knowing. Daniela was building something, and Gabriella was too. The following 4 months were the strangest of this whole process. Strange because on the outside, everything seemed normal. The party advanced. The preparations continued. I was still the same father as always, present, punctual, available. Gabriella kept coming on Sundays. Victoria kept sending cold messages with updates I read and answered with monosyllables, but inside something had changed. I was watching, as Daniela had told me, watching and saving. And the more I watched, the more things I saw that I used to let pass. For example, I started noticing that every time Gabriella arrived at my house on Sundays, she arrived with something new, a bracelet, some sneakers, a different backpack, things I hadn't bought her, things that clearly came from the other house. That in itself wasn't the problem. The problem was what Gabriella said when I asked her where those things came from. She didn't say, "Mom bought them for me." She said, "Mauricio bought them for me. Mauricio this, Mauricio that." Not with admiration, not with the tone of a girl excited about gifts. It was different. It was more like the tone of someone repeating something they've been taught to say, as if there were a narrative under construction in that other house. And Gabriella was, without fully knowing it, part of the script. I kept those conversations in my memory, every detail. One afternoon, Gabriella showed me her phone with excitement because Mauricio had promised to take her to a concert the following month, a concert by a singer she really liked. They had bought tickets for $180 each. I smiled, told her that's great. I asked if she was excited. She said yes, and then, almost without transition, she asked if I could sign a permission slip for a school field trip that cost $45. I signed and put the money in her backpack without saying anything, but I did think something. I thought Mauricio bought presents with expensive objects and bright moments. And I built presents with years, with routines, with difficult nights, with signed forms and paid permissions, and badly made braids that I learned to do better. Two very different ways of being in a person's life. One is seen, the other is felt. And I trusted that Gabriella, my Gabriella, knew how to feel. There were 3 months left until the party when Daniela asked me to meet in person. We met at a coffee shop near her house, a quiet place without many people. A Wednesday afternoon, Daniela arrived with a folder, a physical paper folder, the kind almost no one uses anymore. She put it on the table, but didn't open it yet. She looked at me and asked, "How are you?" I told her the truth. I told her I was holding on, that there were good days and days when the rage was so big I didn't know where to put it, that I missed the version of my life where all this didn't exist, that I wondered if in the end it was going to matter. If everything I had done was going to have any weight in anything. Daniela listened to me, then put her hand on the folder and said, "It's going to matter, I promise you." She opened the folder. Inside there were printed pages, screenshots, dates, numbers. She explained what she had been doing the last few months in silence. Daniela had spoken with 3 people from Victoria's circle, not close friends, but acquaintances, people who orbit that world and who, over time, if treated well and asked the right questions, tell more than they think. What those people had told Daniela was this. Mauricio, that man with the perfect smile who had settled into my daughter's life, as if she had always been his, had debts, major debts. A business that had gone bankrupt 2 years ago and had left outstanding balances with several suppliers. Debts that weren't public, but that existed, that still existed. And Gabriella's 15th birthday party, that $3,800 event for the hall plus orchestra, plus dress, plus decoration, was being funded almost entirely with money I had contributed and with a loan Victoria had taken out without telling me. Mauricio hadn't put in anything, same as always, but his name was everywhere. His figure was going to be in the waltz, his smile was going to be in the photos. And the story that was going to be told that night, the visible story the 200 people were going to witness, was his. I looked at it all in silence. Then I asked Daniela if that was all. She hesitated a second, just a second, and then said no. She took out another page. It was a screenshot of a WhatsApp conversation between Victoria and a friend of hers. Daniela didn't explain how she got it, and I didn't ask. Sometimes you just don't need to know all the details. In that conversation, Victoria told her friend, with those exact words you don't forget because they hurt in a very specific way, that Javier was a good payer, but an ordinary father, that Gabriella already had a real father figure at home. That the waltz with Mauricio was going to be the symbol of the new chapter of the family. The new chapter of the family. I stared at that phrase on the printed page for a time I couldn't calculate. Daniela didn't say anything. She let me be. When I looked up, I asked her what I was supposed to do with all that, and she told me something I didn't expect. She said, "Nothing yet. But is there someone else who needs to know who's also saving things?" I asked her who she was talking about. Daniela smiled for the first time all afternoon and said, "Gabriella." I stood still. She explained that weeks ago Gabriella had called her just like that, on her own, without anyone asking her to. She had called her Aunt Daniela because, according to Gabriella, she needed to talk to someone who understood things without starting to cry or scream. That Gabriella had told her she knew perfectly well about the waltz, that her mom had presented it to her as something decided, not as a question, that she hadn't said yes with enthusiasm. She had said yes with her mouth, but inside she had something she couldn't name, but that squeezed her chest every time she thought about it. That Gabriella had asked Daniela only one thing. She had asked, "Do you think my dad is going to be okay?" Daniela looked at me when she said that, and I had to look away for a moment. 15 years. 15 years of waking up early, of paying, of being there, of never failing. And my 15-year-old daughter was still thinking about me. Not about the waltz, not about the champagne dress, not about the 200 people, about whether her dad was going to be okay. I looked back at Daniela. I asked what she had answered. She told me she had answered yes, that her dad was always okay because he was the kind of person who knows where he stands, even if the whole world tries to move the floor under him. Then Daniela closed the folder and said, "Javier, Gabriella isn't a passive girl in this story. She's thinking, she's feeling, and I think she's planning something." I didn't ask her what, but I know. I've known her since she was born. I left that coffee shop different from how I entered, not calmer exactly, but firmer, because there's a huge difference between enduring an injustice alone and enduring it knowing you're not alone, that there are people who see what you see, that there's someone taking care of you in silence while you take care of others, and that your daughter, who you raised with everything you had grown up exactly as you hoped she would, with open eyes, with her heart in the right place. The following weeks passed slowly and quickly at the same time, as the weeks before something important always pass. I kept going about my business, kept being the same father as always, kept saying nothing to Victoria, without confronting Mauricio, without making any move that could alert them that something was cooking, because something was cooking. Only neither Daniela nor I were the ones holding the reins of that. Those reins were in the hands of a 15-year-old girl who had seen more than anyone had asked her to see and who had decided alone. With that silent maturity, you don't know where it comes from, but that fills you with a pride that doesn't fit in your chest. That night, she was going to say something. There were 2 months left, and the clock kept ticking. There was 1 month left until the party when I received a call I didn't expect. It was a Tuesday night. I was at home reviewing some work papers with the TV on in the background without really watching it. The phone vibrated. I saw the name on the screen. It was Gabriella. Nothing weird about that. Gabriella called me often, but it was late, almost 10 at night, and she had school the next day. I answered. Her voice sounded different, not scared, not sad, different in a way I couldn't name at that moment, like contained, like someone who's about to say something important and is carefully choosing the words before letting them out. She asked how I was. I said fine. I asked why she was still awake. She told me she couldn't sleep. She was thinking about the party. I asked if she was excited. There was a short but real pause, and then she said, "Daddy, you're going to come, right? No matter what happens, you're going to be there." It wasn't a normal question. It was the kind of question that carries more weight than fits in the words. I told her yes, I was going to be there, that there was no force in this world that would keep me away from her party. Gabriella stayed quiet for a moment and then said, "Good. I just needed to hear it." And she hung up. I was left with the phone in my hand, looking at the now dark screen. That call lasted 4 minutes. For minutes that kept me awake all night, not out of anguish, but because something in that voice, in that pause, in that specific question told me Gabriella knew exactly what she was doing, that call wasn't a worried daughter's call. It was a confirmation. She was confirming I had to be there, not as a spectator at the back of the room, but there, present. Ready? Ready for what? I still didn't know. The following week, Daniela called me with news. She told me she had spoken with Gabriella again, that Gabriella had asked her for something very specific. She had asked her to bring her camera to the party. Not the phone, the camera. The good camera, the one Daniela uses when she takes pictures of family events, the one with a lens that captures details phones can't reach. She had asked her to record everything from the moment the waltz music started. Daniela told me with that calm voice she uses when things are already in motion and there's nothing else to do but let them flow. I asked if she had asked Gabriella what for. Daniela said, yes. And she told me I would understand soon. I would understand soon. 14, 15 years. My daughter was 15 years old and was coordinating something with a precision that left me speechless, without anyone having taught her, without anyone having asked her. From inside her own heart, from that part of her that had watched and absorbed and felt for years, she had built a plan and hadn't told us what it was. She had only given us instructions. I had to be there. Daniela had to record. She would do the rest. I sat with that for a few days, processing it, feeling it. There were moments when the emotion was so great, I had to do something with my hands so as not to stay paralyzed. I cleaned the kitchen, went for a walk, called Daniela just to hear her voice. And there were other moments, mostly in the early hours, when fear crept in, the fear that something would go wrong, that Gabriella would regret it at the last minute, that Victoria or Mauricio would somehow find out and cut whatever Gabriella was planning before it could happen. But there was also another fear, a more silent one, the fear I wouldn't measure up to the moment. Because it's one thing to survive 15 years of injustice with your head held high, and another thing to stand in the right place when the moment comes without collapsing, without losing your composure, without your emotions betraying you exactly when you most need to be whole. I talked about that fear with Daniela one night. She listened and told me something I wrote down on my phone that same night because I didn't want to forget it. She said, Javier, you've been preparing for this moment for 15 years, even if you didn't know it. Every night you stayed awake, every sacrifice you made without anyone applauding you, every time you swallowed hard and kept going, all that was preparation. On the day of the party, you just have to be who you already are. You just have to be who you already are. I read it 3 times that night before going to sleep. There were 3 weeks left until the party when something happened that wasn't in any plan. Victoria called me, not by message, by call, which was already unusual. I answered. Her voice had a tone I hadn't heard in a long time. Not the cold tone of administrative messages, but something closer to discomfort, like someone who's going to say something they don't want to say, but has been forced to say. She told me there was a problem with the hall payment. There was a pending balance of $800 that needed to be covered before the following Friday, or they would lose the reservation. I asked how much Mauricio had put in so far. Silence. Not a long silence, but enough. Then she said, that's besides the point, Javier. It's your daughter's party. There was again the shield. Your daughter's party. As if that argument erased everything else. As if the fact it was Gabriella's party justified me putting in the money and another man taking the medal. I breathed and told her yes, I'd send the $800 before Friday, because they were for Gabriella. Always everything was for Gabriella. I hung up, texted Daniela, told her. Daniela replied with 3 words, save the receipt. I saved it. By that point, I already had a folder on my phone with transfer receipts, screenshots of conversations, dates, amounts. Not because someone had told me I need all that for something legal, but because Daniela had taught me that truth without evidence is just a version of events, and I wanted my version to be unassailable. The following days passed with a tension you could feel in your body, in your shoulders, in your jaw clenched without realizing it. I tried on a suit I was going to wear to the party, a dark, well-cut suit I had bought specifically for that night. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because my daughter was turning 15 and I was going to be presentable, even if they had told me to stay at the back. I looked in the mirror with that suit on, and for the first time in many weeks, I felt something akin to calm. I can't explain it well. It was as if the suit were a kind of armor, as if putting it on reminded me who I was and what it meant to be there that night. I was going to be there. And what happened next didn't depend on me. It depended on Gabriella. And I trusted her more than anything else in this world. There was a week left when Gabriella came to my house on a Sunday and brought me something. It was a small white envelope with my name written in her handwriting. That handwriting of hers I'd recognize anywhere in the world because I watched it form from the first kindergarten scribbles to the neat, expressive writing she has now. She handed it to me without saying anything. She looked at me and then went to the kitchen to get water like it was nothing. I opened the envelope. Inside was a small card, one of those simple cards you buy at any stationery store, and written in her handwriting, it said something I won't repeat here word for word because some things are too private to share with anyone. But I will say the essential part. It said she knew, she had always known, there were things she couldn't say out loud yet, but that night she was going to say them, that I shouldn't move from the hall no matter what happened, that I should trust her. And at the end, in slightly larger handwriting than the rest, she had written, "You're my dad. Only you." I looked up. Gabriella was in the kitchen doorway with her glass of water watching me. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. But we looked at each other the way people who truly know each other, who have built themselves together for years, tell each other everything without needing words. I folded the card, put it in my shirt pocket over my chest, and knew I was going to be there that night, standing firm, ready no matter what happened. The night of the party arrived the way nights you've been waiting for too long arrive. Suddenly, with everything. I woke up that Saturday before the alarm went off. It was 6 in the morning, and it was still dark outside. I stayed in bed for a moment staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what was going to happen in a few hours, and then I got up because staying still wasn't an option. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and took out the card Gabriella had given me the week before. I read it once more. "You're my dad. Only you." I folded it, put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, the same position as the week before, over my chest so it would be close. I showered, dressed slowly, carefully, with the concentration of someone preparing for something that matters. The dark suit fit well, the shoes polished, hair combed, as I hadn't combed in months. I looked in the bathroom mirror, 49 years old, a father who had carried 15 of those years practically alone. A man who had learned to do braids, to heat bottles, to sign school permissions, to sit in hospitals, to pay bills no one thanked him for, to swallow humiliations no one saw. A man who that night was going to stand at the back of a room because he had been asked to, but who was going to be there firmly. I called Daniela before leaving. She answered on the first ring, which told me she hadn't slept much either. I asked how she was. She said, "Reddy, how are you?" I told her the truth. I told her my stomach was tight, but I was fine. I was ready. Daniela said, "The camera is charged. I'll arrive early to get a good spot. Don't worry about me. Just focus on being present." I said yes. Then she told me one last thing before hanging up. She said, "Javier, today this ends." I hung up. I left home. The hall was 40 minutes from my apartment. I arrived an hour early because I didn't want to enter with the party already started. I didn't want to give Victoria or Mauricio the satisfaction of seeing me arrive late or seeing me uncomfortable looking for where to stand. I arrived before almost everyone. The hall was beautiful, that must be said. Victoria had organized everything with impeccable taste. Round tables with white tablecloths, flower centerpieces in warm tones, dim lights that gave the place an elegant warmth. At the entrance, there was a table with photos of Gabriella over the years. I stopped in front of that table. There were photos I recognized immediately because I had taken them. Gabriella, a newborn. Gabriella, on her first day of kindergarten with her huge backpack that almost reached her knees. Gabriella in the hospital when she got sick at 7 with a forced but real smile looking at the camera from the bed. I had taken that photo. That night, I slept in the chair. That night, Victoria arrived for 2 hours and left. There was that photo on the memory table of my daughter's 15th birthday party, without any context, without any story, just as a pretty picture of a difficult moment I lived alone. I looked at it a second longer and kept walking. I positioned myself at the back of the room, just as I had been instructed, near the wall, in a place from where I could see the whole dance floor, but where I didn't block anyone's visual panorama, a place of calculated invisibility. I stood there with a glass of water in my hand, watching the room fill up. Victoria's guests arrived first, her friends, her relatives, work acquaintances, people who looked at me out of the corner of their eyes because they probably knew who I was and what my official position was at the event. The biological father, the one who enjoys it more watching from afar. Daniela arrived 20 minutes later. She positioned herself on one side of the room, near the dance floor, but with an angle that allowed her to capture everything. She looked at me from afar. I nodded. She lifted the camera slightly, as if telling me she was ready. And then Victoria and Mauricio arrived. They entered together. Of course, Mauricio in a gray suit that must have cost him more than he had contributed to the party, which was nothing. With that usual smile, greeting everyone, hugging acquaintances, behaving exactly like the protagonist of the night. Victoria looked elegant. You'd have to be petty not to admit it. Her hair was up, wearing a long dark wine dress, and that expression of a woman who has everything under control. She saw me from across the room. Our eyes met for a second. She nodded slightly, as if telling me it was okay I was there, as if my presence were a detail she had authorized, and that didn't pose any problem to her plans. I didn't respond. I held her gaze just long enough and then looked away. Mauricio didn't greet me. He didn't even turn his head to where I was, which was also a way of saying something. Another 20 minutes passed. The room was almost full. 200 people as planned. Conversations, soft background music, the pleasant noise of a celebration about to begin. And then the doors at the back of the room opened and Gabriella walked in. I forgot everything. Victoria, Mauricio, the stored anger, the months of tension, the years of silent injustice. I forgot everything because my daughter entered through those doors in a champagne-colored lace dress that sparkled in the hall's light, her hair in an updo that made her look older than she was, with an expression on her face that mixed emotion and determination in a way only I, who had known her since the first day of her life, could read correctly. It wasn't just a birthday girl's emotion, it was something else. It was the face of someone who knows what they're going to do and has decided to do it. She looked for me with her eyes among the 200 people in the room. It took her a few seconds. The room was big, the lights were dim, there were a lot of people, but she found me, and when she found me, she smiled. Not the party smile, the smile she had been handing out since she entered. Polite, social, birthday girl smile. But my smile, the smile she gives me, the one I've known since she was 3 days old, it lasted half a second. No one else saw it, it was just for me. I swallowed. I held that smile with everything I had. The party started. The master of ceremonies took the microphone. The opening speeches, Victoria's toast, brief and emotional, talking about how proud she was of her daughter, of the woman she was becoming. Applause. Mauricio said a few words too, short but calculated. He talked about Gabriella as if he had known her forever, as if the 5 years he had been in her life were equivalent to the 15 I had been her father. He smiled when he finished. Lots of applause. I didn't clap. I held my glass of water and stayed still. Daniela, from her side, had the camera raised. Then, the master of ceremonies announced the moment everyone was waiting for. The waltz. The music started softly at first. Those first notes recognized by everyone who's been to a 15th birthday party. Those notes that mark the beginning of the most symbolic moment of the night. Mauricio stood up, adjusted his jacket, walked to the dance floor with the confidence of someone who has known for months that this moment is his. He opened his arms to Gabriella with a huge smile. Gabriella got up from her seat, walked to the dance floor. The whole room was watching her. I watched her from the back with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Gabriella reached the center of the dance floor. The music kept playing. Mauricio had his arms open, waiting for her with that smile I already knew by heart. And then Gabriella stopped. She didn't take the step toward Mauricio. She stood still in the center of the dance floor with the music playing around, with 200 people watching her, with Mauricio waiting for her, and she turned her head. Not toward her mother, not toward the tables, not toward any guest, toward the back of the room, toward me, and she raised her arm and pointed straight at me. The whole room followed her finger, 200 heads turning slowly toward the back, toward the man standing by the wall. With a glass of water in his hand, and a dark suit, and 15 years of invisible history that suddenly became completely visible. Gabriella opened her mouth and said something that made Mauricio take 2 steps back, that made Victoria drop her glass, that made the whole room fall into absolute silence, something I won't forget as long as I live. The silence that fell over that room was different from all the silences I've known in my life. It wasn't the silence of discomfort. It wasn't the silence of polite surprise. It was the silence of 200 people holding their breath at the same time, because something was happening before their eyes that none of them had seen coming. Gabriella still had her arm extended, pointing at me, with the music still playing in the background, those waltz notes floating in the air over a completely paralyzed room, and with a clear, firm voice, a voice that didn't tremble, even though I know inside she must have been trembling. She said, "The waltz is with my dad, with the only one I have." 6 words, the same 6 words Victoria had dismissed me with months ago. The biological father enjoys it more watching from afar. 6 words to kick me out, and now another 6 words from my daughter to return me to the place that was always mine. The universe has a very specific way of balancing things out. I heard those words from the back of the room, and something inside me broke and rebuilt itself at the same time. Like when you break something that was already broken, and by breaking it you finally see exactly what was wrong and how it should be. Mauricio stepped back. 2 steps. I saw it with my own eyes. 1 step. 2 steps. The arms he'd held out dropped slowly to his sides. The smile, that smile that had been his shield for years, disappeared for the first time since I met him. There was no anger left on his face, no arrogance. What remained was much more revealing. What remained was confusion. The confusion of someone who had built a whole castle on a foundation that had just disappeared. Victoria dropped her glass. She didn't leave it on the table. She didn't put it down carefully. She dropped it. The sound of glass against the floor was the only thing heard in that room for an eternal second. Then someone among the guests made a sound. Not an applause yet, just an involuntary sound. One of those that escape when you witness something that hits you right in a place you didn't expect to take a hit. And then all eyes turned to me, 200 people looking at me. I didn't move immediately. I needed a second, just a second to breathe, to be sure my legs were going to respond, to make sure that when I walked toward that dance floor, I would do it as the man I'm and not as someone who collapses in the most important moment. I took the first step. The room was still silent. I took the second step, the third. I walked from the back to the center of that dance floor, feeling every single one of those steps in a way I can't fully describe with words. It was like walking through 15 years of history compressed into 20 meters of room. Gabriella watched me walk toward her. When I stood in front of her, when I was 1 step away, I saw her up close for the first time all night without the distance of the room between us. I saw her eyes shining, not crying yet, shining with that determination mixed with emotion I had read on her face since she entered. I held out my hand. She took it, and at that moment the room exploded. It's not an exaggeration. That's how it felt. 200 people who had been holding their breath let it all out at once. Applause. Some shouts of emotion. Someone crying. I clearly heard the crying. I don't know who it was, but I heard it. A lady near the dance floor who brought her hands to her mouth. The music that had kept playing in that silence like a ghost suddenly made sense again. And we danced. My daughter and I danced that waltz. The waltz that was mine from the beginning. The waltz no one could take from me, even if they had tried with all the coldness and all the arrogance in the world. The waltz Gabriella had saved for me without telling anyone but her Aunt Daniela, and that she had handed me in front of 200 people with a clarity and courage that will leave me speechless for the rest of my life. While we danced, I leaned toward her and asked quietly, "Since when did you have it planned?" She answered without missing a step, with that calm of hers that reminds me so much of when she was little and made decisions with enormous seriousness for her age. Since Mom told me what she was going to do with Mauricio, from the beginning, from the very first moment, she had said yes with her mouth, so there wouldn't be any conflict, so the party would be organized. So everything would make it to this night, and she had kept the truth for the exact moment it mattered most. 15 years. My daughter was 15, and she already understood there are moments worth more than all the previous words. The waltz ended amid applause that wouldn't stop. Daniela had recorded it all, every second, from the moment Gabriella stopped on the dance floor to the last step of the dance with that good camera that catches the details phones can't reach. The look on Mauricio, stepping back, the glass dropping, my 20 meters walking from the back, the moment Gabriella took my hand, everything. But the waltz wasn't the only thing Gabriella had prepared for that night. When the music ended and the applause began to die down, Gabriella gently let go of my hand, took the microphone the master of ceremonies offered her, and stood in the center of the dance floor looking at the room. The silence returned, different this time, expectant. Gabriella took a breath and spoke. She said she wanted to take that moment to say something she had been wanting to say for a long time, that she knew there were people in that room who might be uncomfortable with her words, but that the 15th birthday was hers, and if there was a time to be honest, it was then. Victoria had no glass left, but her hands were clenched on the table. Mauricio was standing on one side of the dance floor, motionless, with that expression that still hadn't returned to normal. Gabriella spoke for 3 minutes. 3 minutes Daniela recorded, 3 minutes 200 people listened to, 3 minutes I listened to from the edge of the dance floor without being able to move a muscle. She talked about her childhood, about Sundays at her dad's house, about the badly done braids that got better over time, about the hospital when she was 7 and who stayed those 5 nights, about the signed permissions, the paid tuitions, the homework nights, the school festivals, about all the small, invisible moments that build a person and that no one applauds because they happen in silence. She didn't name Victoria harshly. She didn't attack Mauricio directly, but she said something that summed it all up with a precision that broke my heart in the best possible way. She said, "There are people who are in your life for the photos, and there are people who are in your life for the hard nights. I know exactly who was there on my hard nights, and I wanted everyone here to know it too. There are people who are there for the photos, and there are people who are there for the hard nights." 200 people in absolute silence. Then Gabriella lowered the microphone, looked at me, and said this time with a slightly broken voice, with that tremble she had been holding back throughout the speech. "Thank you, Daddy, for all the nights." And then I did cry. I couldn't help it. I didn't want to help it. 15 years of hard nights, of invisible sacrifices, of swallowing pride and moving forward, of wondering in the darkest moments if any of it was ever going to matter. It mattered. It had mattered the whole time. My daughter had seen it all. She had saved it all. And in the most public and symbolic moment of her life up to then, she had said it out loud in front of everyone. I walked up to her, hugged her, in the room. 200 people stood up. From somewhere in that crowd, I heard Daniela. I didn't see her, but I heard her. I know how my sister cries. And that night, she cried. Somewhere in the room, Victoria remained seated. She hadn't stood up with the rest, and Mauricio had slipped out a side door. No one saw him leave, or maybe they did, but no one said anything because at that moment, no one was thinking about Mauricio, only about Gabriella, only about the two of us in the center of that dance floor that was always ours. What happened after the waltz and Gabriella's speech didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers, the way the real consequences of real moments always happen, not with dramatic background music or perfectly lit scenes, but slowly, in short conversations, in awkward silences, in decisions made when there's no other choice left. That same night, while the party was still going, while people were still dancing and eating and the orchestra was playing, Victoria came up to me. I expected it. I knew it was going to happen at some point in the night. What I didn't know was when or with what tone. She came alone without Mauricio, who had been missing since he left through the side door. She stood in front of me, looked at me, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Then Victoria said, "I didn't know she was going to do that." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't an attack, it was a statement. The kind of statement someone makes when they've just discovered they didn't have the control they thought they had, and they're still processing that discovery. I looked at her and said, I didn't know exactly what she was going to do either, but I did know she was going to do something because I know her. Victoria held my gaze a second longer, then lowered her eyes and left without another word, without extra drama. She went back to her table where her friends were waiting with those expressions of people who have seen too much and don't quite know how to react. That was all we had that night. Those 3 sentences, that minimal exchange that nonetheless said more than hours of conversation. Daniela came up to me shortly after with the camera still in her hand. She told me, "I have everything recorded, clean audio, clear picture." The moment she stopped, the moment she pointed, your walk, the waltz, the speech, everything. I asked what we were going to do with it. Daniela smiled that way of hers, which means she already has a plan, even if she hasn't told you yet. She said, "For now, nothing, save it. The time to use it. If we need to use it, will come." She was right. as almost always, although in this case the time came sooner than either of us anticipated. The days following the party were strange. Gabriella went back to Victoria's house because it was her week there. She called me on Monday to tell me the atmosphere in the house was tense, that Mauricio had arrived late that night, and that on Sunday there had been a long argument between him and Victoria she heard from her room, even though she didn't understand it all. I told her not to worry, that adults resolve those things among adults, that she should focus on being okay. Gabriella told me she was fine. She didn't regret anything she had done. She would do it again. I told her I knew. The following week, Daniela called me with something new. The video was out. Not from her. Daniela hadn't uploaded it. One of the party guests had uploaded it. Someone who had recorded with their phone the moment Gabriella stopped on the dance floor, pointed to the back of the room, and said her words. A 38-second video showing that exact instant and the seconds immediately following. That video had been circulating for 2 days and already had thousands of views. Daniela sent me the link. I opened it. I saw myself walking from the back of the room toward my daughter. It looked small, grainy, with the audio a bit distorted by the distance, but you could see and hear Gabriella's voice, clear, firm. The waltz is with my dad, with the only one I have. I closed the phone, sat quietly for a moment, then opened it again and watched it again. I don't know how many times I watched it that day. Several, not out of vanity, but because there was something about seeing that moment from the outside with the distance of someone else's camera that made it different, even more real, as if I needed that outside perspective to finally believe it had happened. The video kept growing. By the weekend, it had hundreds of thousands of views on different platforms. People sharing it with comments I read, and that left me speechless. People telling their own stories in the comments. Fathers saying they cried. Children saying they called their parents after watching it. People who had never lived anything similar, but who felt something watching it they couldn't fully explain. One of those comments I saved. It said, "There are things money can buy and things you only earn with time. This father earned what money can't buy." I don't know who wrote it, but I saved it. The video going viral had consequences I hadn't anticipated. The first was at Mauricio's job. Mauricio worked at a mid-sized services company. He had a management position. He was known in certain professional circles in the city. When the video started circulating, some people in those circles recognized him. The man who steps back 2 paces in the video, the one who drops his arms, the one who leaves through the side door. He didn't lose his job immediately. That would be too clean, too cinematic. But there were conversations, there were different looks in meetings, there was a change in how certain people treated him, I found out, because Daniela has ears in places I don't. The second consequence was closer and more important. Victoria called me 10 days after the party. This time, yes, with a different tone than the night of the event, more tired, stripped of that armor of confidence she always wore when speaking to me. She told me we needed to talk about Gabriella, not about the party, not about the video, about Gabriella and how we were going to handle things going forward. I said yes, I'd gladly meet in a neutral coffee shop without Mauricio, just the 2 of us for the first time in years. Victoria arrived looking different. I can't exactly describe how. She was physically the same person, but something in her posture, in her way of sitting, in how she placed her hands on the table was different. Like someone who has let go of something heavy they'd been carrying so long, they didn't remember the weight until they let it go. She talked to me for 20 minutes, told me things I didn't expect to hear. Not everything, not a complete and perfect movie apology, but enough. She told me she had made mistakes. She had allowed Mauricio to occupy spaces that weren't his, that the phrase she had told me, the one about the biological father, enjoying it more watching from afar. She had said with an unjustified cruelty, and that when she heard it repeated in her head after that night, she couldn't sleep. I listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, I told her 2 things. I told her what mattered now was Gabriella, that everything else, the mistakes, the wounds, the difficult years, we could leave where they were because carrying them forward didn't help anyone, especially didn't help our daughter. And I told her if she was willing to make things work differently from then on, I was willing to work on that. For Gabriella. Always for Gabriella. Victoria nodded. I don't know what happened between her and Mauricio in the following weeks. It wasn't my story to know in detail. What I did find out, because Gabriella told me with a naturalness that showed she had processed it better than I expected, was that Mauricio had moved out of Victoria's house a month after the party. Gabriella told me on a Sunday while we were having breakfast. I asked how she felt about it. She said, "A bit weird at first, but good." I asked if she missed anything about that phase. She thought for a moment and then said, "The weekend trips were nice, but they don't change anything important. They don't change anything important." 15 years. My daughter was 15 and already understood something many adults take decades to learn or never learn. That bright moments, inexpensive objects, and nice trips are easy to give. That the hard part, what really builds a person, are the ordinary nights, the Tuesdays with nothing special, the Sunday breakfasts, the badly done braids that get better, what can't be bought, what is only earned with time. Daniela called me that same week to tell me something else. She told me the original video, the 38-second one, had reached 1 million views. 1 million people who had seen my daughter stop in the middle of a dance floor and point to the back of a room where I was standing with a glass of water and 15 years of invisible history. 1 million people who had seen something that for me was the most important moment of my life as a father. I saved that number somewhere, not for the number itself, but because it represented something I had learned those weeks in a very concrete way, that silent injustices don't always stay silent, that sometimes the moment comes, that sometimes the truth finds its way into the light without anyone having to force it, that sometimes your 15-year-old daughter, the girl you carried in your arms when she was 3 days old, decides enough is enough and says it out loud in front of everyone. There was a final part to this story, the most unexpected of all. 3 weeks after the party, Gabriella asked me to take her out for coffee, not for breakfast at home, not the Sunday routine. She specifically asked we go out, that we go somewhere outside, just the two of us somewhere different. I said yes without asking why. We chose a small coffee shop near her school, a place she knew and I had never visited. We arrived on a Saturday morning, ordered 2 coffees and some food, and sat across from each other at a table by the window. Gabriella had something in her hands. An envelope, not the small kind of envelope like the one she had given me weeks before with the card. This one was bigger, thicker. She put it on the table between us, but didn't hand it to me yet. She put her hands over it, as if protecting it, and looked at me. She told me there was something she wanted to tell me, something she hadn't told me before the party, because she wanted that night to be what it was, without me knowing everything beforehand, without anything changing the moment. I told her I was listening. Gabriella took a breath and told me that months before her party, when her mom had informed her about the waltz with Mauricio, her first reaction hadn't been the plan we all saw that night. Her first reaction had been pain, a very specific pain, the kind of pain only felt by someone who understands exactly what's happening, even if no one explained it to them. She told me that night, after Victoria told her about the waltz, she locked herself in her room and cried for hours. That she didn't cry over the waltz itself. She cried because she understood there were people in her life willing to erase 15 years of history with a single decision made in 5 minutes, and that in that crying, at some point during that long night, she made a decision that if a story was going to be written about her family, about her life, about who had been there and who hadn't, she was going to be the one to put the final period on that story. Not her mom, not Mauricio. I sat listening without saying anything. Then she told me she had done something else, besides planning the waltz moment. She slid the envelope toward me. I opened it. Inside were folded pages. I unfolded them slowly. They were letters, not one, several. Gabriella explained that for the last 2 years, she had been writing not exactly a diary, but letters. Letters addressed to me she had never sent because she didn't know when the right time to give them to me was. Letters written at different times, some with rushed handwriting. You could tell it was at night by the pen's pressure, others with calmer, neater handwriting from those quiet mornings when you write with time. Letters talking about specific things. About a day, I arrived to pick her up at school in the rain because the bus failed and I showed up unannounced with an umbrella and a face of "it doesn't matter. I'm here." She was 11 that day, and wrote to me about it 2 years later because she said that moment had stuck with her in a way she didn't fully understand, but knew it was important. About a night, she was sad over something at school, a fight with a friend, something that in perspective was small, but at 13 feels huge. And I sat with her on the couch without saying much, just being there. And that was enough, more than enough. About a Saturday, I took her to a fair and spent more than I should have spent at that time with my finances. She found out years later when she better understood how money worked. And even then, I hadn't said anything. I just smiled and bought her cotton candy and the ring toss game and the Ferris wheel ride. Letter after letter after letter. Small moments. Moments I had lived without knowing she was saving them, without knowing she was filing them somewhere in her memory with the precision of someone who instinctively understands what's valuable and what isn't. I read every letter in silence while Gabriella held her coffee mug with both hands and watched me read. When I finished the last letter, I looked up. I had no words. I looked for them and couldn't find them. And sometimes not finding the words is the most honest answer you can give. Gabriella told me, I wrote them because I wanted you to know I saw everything. I always saw everything, even if I didn't say it. Even if I didn't say it. I carefully folded the letters, put them back in the envelope, and stored that envelope in my jacket's inside pocket, in the same place I had carried her card the night of the party, over my chest. Then I told her the only thing I felt at that moment with enough clarity to turn into words. I told her, Gabriella, I didn't do anything extraordinary. I did what a father is supposed to do. The thing is, sometimes the ordinary done with consistency ends up being the most extraordinary thing of all. She smiled and said, That's exactly what I wrote in the last letter. I hadn't read it with that interpretation. I opened the envelope again. I looked for the last letter, the last line. It said, The ordinary things you do every day are the most extraordinary things I know. The same idea, with different words, arriving at the same place from two different directions. That's what happens when someone truly knows you. They think like you without having agreed beforehand. I paid for the coffee. We walked out of the coffee shop into the sun of that Saturday morning. We walked for a while without a specific destination, like we did when she was little and Sundays had no schedule, just time together. At some point, Gabriella took my arm as we walked. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. There was no need. That morning I understood something I had been trying to articulate for a long time and had never fully managed to put into words, that fatherhood isn't an event, it's not a party, it's not a waltz in front of 200 people. Even if that waltz was the most beautiful moment of my life as a father. Fatherhood is what happens before that moment and after that moment, and in all the in-between moments no one photographs and no one applauds. It's the kindergarten braid, it's the hospital chair, it's the umbrella in the rain. It's the shared couch in silence. It's the $620 tuition paid in a hard month without telling anyone. It's the ordinary done with consistency every day without expecting anyone to see it. Although sometimes, if you're lucky, if you did things right, if the person you dedicated those years to grew up with open eyes and their heart in the right place, someone sees it. And one day, in front of 200 people with the music playing and everyone watching, that person reaches out their arm, points to the back of the room where you're standing with your glass of water and your dark suit and your 15 years of invisible history, and says your name. And the waltz that was always yours, finally is. Only yours, as it always should have been.